Look, it is wonderful to have everyone here, and we will get back to having great dinner conversation in just a moment. But to get things underway, I'd like to start by welcoming you. I'm Jim Crown, and on behalf of my fellow trustees of the Aspen Institute, it gives me great pleasure to welcome everybody to this terrific celebration that we have annually, and in support of the Aspen Institute. And while I do have prepared remarks, not only going to deviate from those, I'm also going to deviate from the strict nonpartisan nature of the Institute's character. How about those Cubs? We're having two great nights in a row here. We thank Joe Madden for last night. For tonight, I really want to acknowledge our tireless dinner chair, Mercedes Bass. She does this year after year. Mercedes, thank you very much. This evening is always so wonderful, and you can tell from the energy it's another terrific success. We had a dinner co-chair committee. I'd like to thank those folks as well. My family was on that committee, as well as Jane and Michael Eisner, Judy and Leonard Lauder, the John P. and Ann Walsh McNulty Foundation, Diane Morris, Linda and Stuart Resnick, the Lori M. Tisch Illumination Fund, and my good friends at Tishman Speyer. Thank you all. Gratitude also extended to our dinner vice chair committee, Jackie and Mike Bezos, Bloomberg Philanthropies, the Henry and Gladys Crown Charitable Trust, John and Jenny Paulson, Carrie Walton Penner, Pete Peterson, Margot and Tom Pritzker Family Foundation, and the Steele family. Thank you all. So the board will be meeting tomorrow in committee and full board, and I don't want to deter attendance by summarizing that whole meeting in one sentence, but if I were to do so, it would be to report that the Institute is really thriving and in great shape. We've remained true to our mission of promoting values-based leadership. We've remained focused, strong, and I believe relevant in our effort to support the efforts of finding common ground at a time when that seems to be a rather scarce form of real estate. I credit a lot of that to our terrific leadership, and that is headed, of course, by our President and CEO, Walter Isaacson. Walter, thank you. And Walter leads a terrific senior management team and has a gifted staff, and that has helped the Institute remain strong. It also has remained strong because of the financial support that all of you have provided. And it's not just your support, but your participation, whether you've attended a seminar, served on leadership network capacity, been part of a roundtable, a membership of the Society of Fellows. The Institute has probably touched all of you in some way, and we thank you for your continued engagement. So last night was a special reception. We've done this annually now for quite a while. This is the 9th annual John P. McNulty Prize Award evening. It was last night, and the prize recognizes an individual in the Aspen Global Leadership Network for undertaking an outstanding project that makes a significant impact on the world. We want to thank Ann McNulty and the McNulty family for establishing this reward. And this year's prize winner was awarded to Dr. Amy Crockett. And Amy, I believe, is over on the left here. Amy, could you stand up, please? Thank you. Let me tell you a little bit about Amy. So Amy's worked on an incubator in the state of South Carolina that's had an incredibly significant impact in reducing an unconscionably high level of preterm births. And what I learned was that the preterm birth rate in that state exceeded that of the Sudan. Amy has developed and expanded an innovative model for group prenatal care called Centering Pregnancy, and her efforts to improve health outcomes for mothers and babies across the state has been fantastic, especially because she addresses the most vulnerable. We have a 1-minute video here that I'd like to share with you that describes Amy's work in a little more detail.
I love delivering babies, but it doesn't always go right. When babies come too soon or too small, they have lifelong consequences. Maybe the secret was hiding right in front of our eyes all along, and it's not about me and my medical training, it's not about the latest surgery, it's not about the newest drug. It's about women connecting with each other and how that social support can impact the gene expression in their placenta is really just a profound idea.
Amy, thank you, and thank you to the McNulty family as well. So, about tonight, a terrific program. We'll be bestowing awards on two exceptional leaders who have made and continue to make an enormous contribution to the betterment of their communities, this nation, and the world. I also couldn't help but notice that we seem to have sourced our awardee list tonight out of Duke University. I'm married to a Duke alumna, and I think there are a number of Duke degrees swirling around in this entire program tonight. But the first awardee will be the Institute's Public Service Award, and that is going tonight to the incomparable Melinda Gates. Many people, and rightly so, regard Melinda as probably the most powerful advocate in the world for girls and women today. We pay tribute to her as an innovator who has redefined, in large measure, has redefined how philanthropy can work with, in her section, sorry, wrong page, and her incredibly thoughtful leadership based on both creativity and measurement has been an inspiration to all of us who follow how those things might work. After Walter has spoken with Melinda, we'll let you enjoy your meal, and then we'll come back to the stage to present the Henry Crown Leadership Award, and that will be going to my good friend and predecessor as board chair, Bob Steele. We can't claim credit at the Institute because I know Bob has always been this way, but he just personifies effective and enlightened leadership. That presentation we'll hear from Bill Mayer, who is the Institute Chairman Emeritus and Chair of the Henry Crown Leadership Program Board of Overseers, and Frances Hoffman, Trustee of the Henry and Gladys Crown Charitable Trust. We have a very special distinguished guest, the former mayor of this great city, Michael Bloomberg. As most of you know, Bob served under Mayor Bloomberg as deputy mayor, and Mayor Bloomberg will share some brief remarks on behalf of our awardee. And then we'll close out the evening with a very timely conversation with one of the finest broadcast journalists this nation has ever produced, Mr. Tom Brokaw. Interviewing Tom will be Jane Pauley, another of television's most respected and iconic journalists. And you may recall that Tom and Jane worked together as a formidable duo on NBC's Today Show a couple iterations ago. Their brand of journalism has been characterized by both distinctive excellence and unimpeachable integrity. And I can't tell you, when I was looking at this, the idea of having a sentence that had journalism, distinctive excellence, and unimpeachable integrity in the same sentence was a wonderful thing to be able to read. We'll hear Tom's take on our current affairs, obviously the election coming up next Tuesday. And now, it is my great pleasure to welcome to the stage Walter Isaacson for our first awardee. Walter?
Melinda Gates is not only the co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, but she really changed a focus into empowering women and helping women and girls around the world. And that has become a theme of philanthropy in other places following her great lead. She's somebody who was a computer science major at Duke, one of the leaders of women in technology, but also somebody who combines both her values and her analytic mind to help redefine philanthropy. So it's our great honor to give our Public Service Award to somebody I've admired and liked for so many years now, Melinda Gates.
I'll just say a couple of words, and then I know we're going to sit and have a conversation, but it feels honestly a little funny to accept this award because I feel like in some ways we're just beginning. And Bill and I call what we do at the Foundation a learning journey, and I hope to be learning my entire life. But I can tell you that I've already learned a lot. And one of the most important things I've learned is that you have to be an optimist. And I think that's one of the reasons that Walter is such an effective leader of the Aspen Institute, so I thank you for this award, because you see the complex problems of the world, but you don't give up. And you take great minds like people in this room and you apply them to those problems. And that's what we're trying to do also in philanthropy. Some of the things we work on, which we'll talk about, are inequity and poverty, problems that have been around since the beginning, the dawn of humanity. But I think, one of my heroes in this work is Eleanor Roosevelt, and she said, "You must do the thing that you think you cannot do." And I can tell you that this work challenges us every single day as a couple. And when we got started, we always knew, we both came from backgrounds, our families had backgrounds in public service. We knew the wealth that come from Microsoft would go back to society. It was just a matter of when, not if, and then it became how. And an early trip Bill and I took to East Africa started us along that journey, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit tonight. But the thing that I have come to learn is, and maybe Jimmy Carter said it best when he was at the foundation in the early days, I said to him, "What should we learn from you that would take us a long time to learn if I didn't ask you?" And he didn't take him like 2 seconds to answer. And he said, "Whatever work you begin, even if it starts here in Seattle, you have to ground it culturally, and people have to think it's their work. If they don't buy into it, if they don't agree to any of the changes you're asking them for, you can go away and it's just not going to stick." And he was absolutely right. So every single thing that we talk about tonight, our foundation does in partnership with others, and deep, deep partners around the world. And so I accept this award on behalf of the amazing frontline heroes that I meet in the world who really are helping us transform the world. So thank you.
What you just said really struck home, which is grounded in the other people. You go on listening tours. Explain me what a listening tour is.
Yeah, so I go out in the field. I'm in the developing world a minimum of 3 times a year, and minimum. And I go out as a Western woman, a pair of khaki pants and a t-shirt. They just know that I'm from the US, and I'm there to hear about their lives. And is there anything that maybe somebody from the West should know that we could do to help them? And so often I'll start with questions I have for them, but I always give at least half of the time to hear what they want to bring up. And sometimes the conversations go and go and go. And they will eventually, a lot of times, invite you into their home and tell you what their lives are about. And you have to listen carefully, because while we might want to go in and talk about, for instance, vaccines on behalf of the foundation, which we do, they want to tell you about their lives and what they really need and where their hardships are. And I listen carefully because it helps me inform the strategies at the foundation. And I'm a big believer in not just raw data and numbers, you need that, but also the stories and the anecdotal data. I think you get the best if you mix both of those together. Then you know how to really help people lift up and transform their own lives.
You know, that sort of clicked into me, because when I think of you and Bill Gates, I think these are the most intense listeners I've ever met. I mean, I watched both of you listen. What surprised you when you were on a listening tour?
Well, what surprised me, I think, in the beginning was how connected we are as humanity. I meet mothers and fathers around the world, And I think if I went around table by table and asked probably most of you what you care about in this room, you'd probably talk about your kids. And when I'm out in the field, they talk about their kids, and they talk about the incredible lengths they are going to and the investments that they're making to give their kids an education, to get them out of poverty. And they know what it will take, and they are so determined to do it. And so when I often will say, what are your hopes and dreams? They answer about their children. They don't answer about themselves. It's really unbelievable.
That's amazing. And it happened in your life because your parents cared very much about education. A little plug, they're from New Orleans, the French family, moved to Dallas, but we forgave them. Tell me about your father and mother and how they pushed you into education.
Yeah, so my dad was first generation to go to college. My mom didn't go and regretted it. And my dad went to a Catholic school that was taught by priests and was told by several of them to get out of poverty, you need to actually get out of here. You need to move away. And my dad did a work-study program, made his way through Georgia Tech, got a scholarship to Stanford. And so when I was growing up in Dallas, which is where my dad had his work-study program, he went to work then there at that company on the Apollo space program. He believed in education, and he told all 4 of us kids in the family, you will go to college. You can go anywhere in the country you want to get into. The better school, the better, because it'll serve you well your whole life. But he was determined that even though we were a very lower middle class family, that he would not take out debt. That none of us would come out with debt. And so he started, besides his engineering job, we ran a family business of rental properties. And I did a lot of cleaning of ovens and mowing of lawns. My sister and I actually kept the books of the business, so I knew a lot about business going into college. But it was because of my dad's determination and my mom's that all 4 kids would be college going.
You mentioned that they were a very Catholic family. I think you went to Ursuline in Dallas. How did your faith inform what you did?
Well, it's interesting because I didn't go to the best high school in Dallas. And in fact, my sophomore year of high school, I railed against my parents for not sending me to the best all-girls school in Dallas. And they said, well, we believe in these Catholic values, and we know you can make it. We know you can make it into the college you want to. And in that school, though, the nuns were actually very liberal, and they taught us about questioning our faith, questioning what we were learning. They taught us about silence. I went on silent retreat in high school. Can you imagine high school girls going on silent retreats? And I still take time in silence. I'm just back from a silent retreat last week with a group of women I've been doing it with for 15 years.
Wait, tell me about that.
It's a time that you go off in silence and you're just reflective about your life, about gratitude, about how lucky we are. And it really helps me inculcate my values and make sure I'm living those out. And in fact, these field trips that I do on behalf of the foundation, I almost always, if I can, even though I still have 2 of 3 kids at home, I squeeze in a day in between the field learning and before I come home, because I know when I come home it's going to be chaos and busy with kids and business and work, for a day of silence, because it helps me inculcate what I've heard and what I've learned, and I make sure that I'm really taking that back. Because some of what you see in the developing world is very harsh. I've had women ask me, even though they don't know, they just know I'm from the US, to take their children home with them because they know they will be better off going with another mom, right? And so you have to take that in and think about, okay, what lengths would I go to if I lived in her situation? What would I want? How would I transform my life? And so without that time of silence in between, I don't think I could really take in the heartbreaking things I'm seeing and then look at the other side and say, okay, what do we need to do to help these women lift themselves up or transform their families' lives?
You talk about the nuns teaching you to push back and sometimes question faith. And I know one of the strong things you've decided to make a goal of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is basically birth control for, I can't remember how many people, by 2020. Did you have to wrestle with that?
Very much. It took me probably almost, to be honest, 2 years to decide I was going to come out publicly and do that, because I knew that I kept looking for the leader who would do it. I knew it needed to be done. You know, there are 225 million women that are crying out to us for birth control. I mean, birth control, the simple thing we have in the United States, or different forms of it. And we know, I mean, the pill in the United States, we don't even think about it really as families now, but you know, the pill's been around now for more than 50 years. 2010, we celebrated 50 years of the pill. It's what allowed women to have healthy timing and spacing of the births of their children and allowed us to go into the workforce or to get a college degree. So women are asking us for this, and I knew it. I was out in the field talking about vaccines, and they would constantly ask me about birth control. And women in Africa would say to me, but I went to the clinic. And in Africa, the predominant thing they get is a shot. They get it every 3 months. It's very painful. It's intramuscular. But they get it because it's covert. Their husbands don't know they're using it. But they would say to me, you're asking me about shots for my children. I know about those. I care about them. They're in stock. But what about my shot? Why, when I go to that clinic and I walk 10 kilometers and I make up an excuse to my husband, I leave my field, I take my baby, I can't get it? And it was this rallying cry. And as I would come back and look at the data, at first the data showed that contraceptives were stocked in, but as I looked more deeply, not the type that women were telling me they wanted in Africa. And
That's what happens when you listen.
That's what happens when you listen. And I kept wanting to turn away. I kept wanting to say, no, we'll just keep working on childhood vaccines. But eventually, as I started to learn the history of this field and understand how we backed away in global health as a world from contraceptives, and why politically and why because of the Catholic Church, I knew someone had to take it on. And I couldn't find that person. I kept looking for them. And I just finally realized I needed to step up and do it. And that my faith, I'm still a practicing Catholic. I have a deep faith. I think there's an amazing social justice mission from the church. But I also believe in life and in saving the most lives. And if you can save mothers' lives and in children's lives, we have to do that. And if 93% of Catholic women in our country use birth control, I think that's the right thing to do.
You know, but you also come at this issue as a technologist, somebody who understands science and reads biology textbooks with your husband for fun. You talk about that shot every 3 months. What technological breakthroughs are you pursuing on the birth control?
Okay, let me just be clear about one thing here, to be completely honest. My husband reads a biology textbook, and then he explains it to me. He always says that if you know a topic deeply, when you can teach it to someone else, so he'll often I'll read the articles, I'll meet with the scientists, but he'll read the whole textbook, and literally on vacation, a lot of beach vacations, I listen, and he will explain it to me. And if he can't answer something, I know he doesn't actually know it. And so we have this back and forth, and it's really nice. It's how we learn, because I tend to do more of the field learning and the on-the-ground listening. But one of the things in this birth control space was it had been almost 30 years since we'd put any money as a country into research on birth control, because the pill works in the United States. But women around the world will tell you they can't use the pill. They can't hide it from their husband. They can't remember to take it every day. And this intramuscular shot they were getting is what they want, but they want to be able to have it more easily and have it in supply. And so we and other partners are now putting in money, and we've gotten, instead of it being this difficult shot to get, just like a diabetes drug now, you can give it to yourself. We've created this little blister pack with a little tiny needle that a healthcare worker, we can put it in her kit. She can go out and give it to women, and then we're working on the registration in about 36 countries, so that eventually we can give it to women and they can just take it home, hide it in their mattress, give it to themselves. That's a game changer. And that's what the difference between technology and the difference it can make for women.
You mentioned a moment ago, yeah, you can applaud that too. You mentioned a moment ago, sort of jokingly, you and Bill on the beach discussing the latest in biology, and you said, but you bring other things to the relationship that you come back from your field trips. I've seen you all together, and you're both very different but very complementary. How are you different from Bill, and how do the two of you complement each other?
Well, let me first say how we're the same, and then I'll tell you how we're different. So we both come from families that believed in volunteerism, public service, social justice. That was huge. We're both extremely competitive. We're both second children. I have a computer science degree. Bill doesn't. That's a difference.
Wait a minute. You graduated and he didn't, so it's
That's
even
right.
bigger than that.
That's right. No, he used to joke, actually, when we got married, he joked on stage that between us, because I have 3 degrees, we have 1.5. Yeah. So But we're both second children, and I think we both listen and challenge things, and we challenge the status quo. He's not afraid to challenge the status quo. I'm not afraid to challenge the status quo. We're not afraid to challenge each other. And I think that's, I love architecture, for instance. He doesn't as much. He likes it, but doesn't love it. But I love that, you know, when you get that kind of tension between an architect and an interior decorator, where when you have that that sort of butting of heads of tension, you get the best product. Bill and I aren't afraid to do that with each other. And so we do it in private, but we challenge each other, challenge what we really know, challenge our assumptions. You know, Bill comes very much from a scientific point of view. I love that about him. And I believe in science. I totally love the science. But I come more from a delivery side. And so where he will be working and helping create the science, I'll say, but look, if you're not designing it with a woman in mind, or you're not thinking about the delivery, you can have the best science come out of the lab, and we can even put it in a vial, but if that woman won't accept those polio drops in her child's mouth or that shot in her child's arm, it's a non-starter. And so we come from these different angles, and over time we've really learned together. And now polio, which he is really leading, I'm leading more the reproductive health, and then we're both kind of leading everything else. Believe me, his whole name of his game right now is 98.5% delivery. It is all about the last mile in polio, and it is about taking his world-class science and doing delivery. And he knows that now, and he's learned it deeply. And he's challenged me to really learn the science. And so I think that's a nice collaboration.
Great. You mentioned your computer science degree from Duke. Why are there so few women in computer science?
Yeah, this is something I've started to use my voice behind in the United States because it kind of is shocking to me, actually. The time I was in college at Duke in the 1980s, women were on the rise in computer science. We got up to about 37% of graduates in computer science were women. Medicine and law were right around the same place. Medicine and law, we almost have parity in graduates of men and women. The other sciences are on the rise. Computer science went from a peak of 37%. We're now down at 18% of graduates are computer science, are women, are graduates of computer science majors. And to me, this is a huge societal issue. These are some of the best jobs in society. They're cutting edge, they pay well. And if you think about how unbelievably pervasive technology is on our lives and how many companies want technologists working there, to think that it's a field women don't want to go into, that's a problem in the highest income country in the world. Wow. And so I've started to look at the data, at who's gathering data. Some of the data's not so great. We have some. No one really knows why, but there looks like there's a correlation. At the time when when I was growing up, the games were very gender neutral. I played Pong on the Atari. Some of you may have played that, or Pac-Woman or Pac-Man. But then when the gaming industry became very male-centric, very shoot 'em up, women left the field in droves. And so we have this, we have this leaky pipeline basically from kindergarten through the C-suite. And I think there are interventions we can do along the pipeline that we need to be doing to really make it a field that women want to go into and are attracted to go into.
One of the things I've noticed both in this conversation and in your work is you've begun to see things through a gender lens, and so it goes across the board. Tell me how that applies.
Yeah, when I first got into philanthropy, I kind of wanted to stay away from the gender issues. I saw them as kind of the soft things. I would see women kind of talk about them and stuff, and I thought, no, I'm a hardcore technologist, I believe in data, I believe in science. But as I've been out there and starting to really, really look at societies and learn the problems, you realize that women are the ones who so often are carrying the burden in homes. Not definitely in the developing world, but also even in the United States. Women usually do the unpaid work at home, the second shift. But in the developing world, I see women coming up against these inequities over and over and over again, and we aren't making investments as a world on behalf of women. And one of the reasons we're not is we don't collect the data to even understand. The number of women, the millions of women who go unregistered at birth and at death around the world is huge. If you're not registered at birth, how can you ever get your property rights? How can you ever have a bank account, have a cell phone, right? And so because we haven't collected the data, We don't work on what we can't measure. So we have to collect the data. These are the hard issues. But what I've come to learn from the data we have is that if you empower a woman, she empowers everybody around her. She decides who eats in her house. She decides who eats first, who gets what. She's often the one that's in charge of the malarial medication. She's often the one who's in charge of making sure there's school fees when the time is due. So when we got into this, just one segue for a minute, but when I got into this birth control issue and we went out and we raised $2.6 billion on behalf of women for birth control, I didn't even realize, it wasn't until I met with a group of women later that night when this whole event was over. We'd spent months getting ready for it, raising the money. And it was a group of women who opened my eyes, actually in the UK, and they said, do you realize what you've done? And I said, yeah, it's amazing. We just raised $2.6 billion. We're gonna get 120 million women voluntary access, I hope, to birth control. And they said, no, you finally raised money with a B behind it. It's the first $1 billion that have been raised on a woman's issue. And I never even really thought of it. We don't invest at a huge scale in women. And I think that's a really big mistake. And unless we collect the data and make the investments, we won't change.
And you talk about collecting the data. What have you learned from computer science, being a data and content person when you were at Microsoft, that you apply to this, where sometimes in the philanthropy world, people aren't saying, okay, let's collect the data?
Well, you know, when I was at Microsoft, we didn't make decisions without customer data. We were trying to think out ahead. We were trying to come up with products that sometimes customers didn't even quite know they wanted yet, right? But we always had sales figures and data, and I would get, first it was paper-based, then it was on my computer. So how can Bill know if he's at the end game of polio if he's not getting a spreadsheet, right? How can I know in reproductive health whether I'm actually fixing the supply chain in West Africa and country by country unless I have the data, unless we're collecting it? So what we've had to learn is that we've actually had to go out with like Johns Hopkins and build a data enumeration set in many countries in Africa, over 3 dozen, where women go out with their cell phone and actually collect the data so I can get a report that shows, okay, was it coerced? Was it voluntary? What tools was she taught about? Were they in supply? Were they not? And the interesting thing is, as we're collecting these data, what we're finding is there's value even in just not only knowing the data, but the women are telling us the stories of their lives. And I've been in some of these homes when these enumerators go out, and women will tell you, nobody's ever asked me my story. No one's ever cared enough about me to ask me about the 2 children I lost and the 2 who are alive. And when these young women, these enumerators will try to go into a household, sometimes the man will turn them away at the hut and say, no, you can't come in and talk to my wife even though you're from the village. And she will find a way to come out and say, meet me at the well in an hour. I will be there. Because she's heard about these women enumerators going around and she wants to tell her story. But so without that data, we don't know how to act. And for us as a philanthropy, I mean, one of the things Bill and I are incredibly cognizant of is, yes, our resources look enormous to people, but the truth is, our resources for the problems we're working on in society, they are tiny. All they can be is this catalytic wedge. It takes governments to scale these programs up. So I can't go call on the UK government or the US government or a government in Kenya to say, invest some of your own money, unless I know that I'm willing to put down my $100,000 or my $1 million. So, and I won't put that $1 million down if I don't have good data. So I can't go ask them if I'm not comfortable making the investment. And Bill and I aren't comfortable making those investments unless we know we're getting a return. And that's why the data is so important.
Although in your answer, I found it interesting that you say it's the data combined with the personal stories and the actual emotional things. And thanks for giving Johns Hopkins School of Public Health a shout out. It'll make Mayor Bloomberg happy.
Well, Michael's a huge inspiration to us in this work because he funded Johns Hopkins early in malaria. You know, Hopkins is one of the places that has been on the cutting edge of global health, But they were also on the cutting edge, if you go back in their history, of inequity in the United States. It's one of the places where minorities could show up and get amazing services, right? And so, we follow. I mean, I think one of the neat things that's going on in philanthropy is philanthropists are talking to each other. So the incredible work that Michael's foundation has done, and Patty Harris is here, who's been a huge leader in this, is like in the area of tobacco, we follow them. They're doing the incredible work in tobacco, and we're making investments following their path and alongside of them. We don't need to learn everything in every field. You learn to trust your partners and trust how they go about the work. And it's been really interesting to watch some of the different philanthropists that we're also learning from now, and how they're taking apart the problems maybe in the sector of criminal justice, right? Which is not something we will ever work on, but wow, I'm seeing amazing stuff starting to happen in a field like that.
I'm going to ask one last personal question, because you kept talking about women's empowerment, how deeply it was for you. And if you don't mind me asking, was it difficult for you as a major executive at Microsoft, handling all sorts of great content issues, to say, I now have kids, I'm going to take some time off?
Well, it was, I loved my job at Microsoft. I worked there for 9 years. It was exhilarating. But I just knew, I mean, when I got pregnant, there was no way Bill could be the CEO of the company, and the values that we talked about while we were engaged, that we had for our marriage and what we wanted for our children, I just didn't think there was any way to live that out with a hard-charging CEO in the tech sector. I knew what that job took. So I actually surprised Bill when I said to him, I'm going to step out of my job. He was shocked because he knew how much I loved it. And but I knew it was for a time, and I always knew I would come back and do something. I didn't know what, but I knew I would step back into business at some point. And it didn't take very long until, well, Patty Stone-Cipher, until she was leaving Microsoft, and we started to realize we were going to ramp up our philanthropy. And I started to really, really enjoy it. It became, it's become a joy for both of us.
And to go back to the beginning, you talked about your parents and the values they inculcated. Of course, Bill Gates, the elder, is a person of enormous deep value. So was Mary Gates of the United Way across the United States. That's Bill Gates' mother. And now you've got 3 kids, just on the verge. I think I read in Julia Reed's piece in the Wall Street Journal this weekend that Jennifer went with you to Tanzania, and one of your other children to Malawi. Mm-hmm. How are you, go ahead, how are you bringing them in?
Yeah, and our third daughter spent 2 weeks, two summers ago in Rwanda, and 3 weeks this past summer, and she's begging me to do 4 weeks in Rwanda this coming summer, and she's 14. Oh, wow. Yeah, so...
What's it like being in a village with her, or with one of them?
It's fantastic. So our oldest daughter, Jen, she was 15 when she and I went out and stayed with a Maasai family in their boma, in the middle of Tanzania. And, when the lights go out in Tanzania, it's pure darkness. The only thing we had were these headlamps, and the family had one electric bulb. Well, there was no electricity, but they had a bulb that ran in their house, and from some solar. And if you stay overnight and you stay several days and you're working the farm with them, I mean, we were carrying water. We were chopping wood, as pathetic as I was at it, even though I used to mow lawns. I'm terrible at chopping wood, it turns out. You learn how backbreaking that labor is. And you also start to learn even though this was a very loving relationship, the woman had chosen, she had the authority to choose to marry her husband. It wasn't an arranged marriage. But you see how the chores are split on the farm, and you see how much time women spend tending the fire, getting the wood, boiling the water. They're boiling water all day long to have enough water. And the woman kept saying all day, even though we'd gone to the water pan twice, 3 of us carrying many liters on our head, we don't have enough water, we don't have enough water. And so you just, when you're there, you actually really see what life is like.
And you get to hand it down to the next generation to try to inculcate the values as you did in your family? Yeah, I mean,
for our 3 kids, we are not saying that they're going to run our foundation one day. I mean, that's a decision to be made down the road. But what I want them to have is the family values, that they are global citizens, they are lucky. Any child born in this country is a lucky person. And to be born in the circumstances that our kids are born in is unbelievably lucky. And I want them to know that they're global citizens of the world and they have a responsibility to give something back, no matter what that is that they choose to do. I first want them to have their own career, find out what they're good at, but one day they will, they may each have their own foundations, and I expect them to give something back to the world. And it looks like my 14-year-old may actually get out in front of her parents. She wants to build a school in Rwanda. So.
And we can't wait to give her the Public Service Award 20, 30 years from now. But I hope you see why Melinda Gates is our Public Service Awardee. Thank you very much.